Come with me, toy fans.
I would like you to be my guest at a ceremony that will make this battle station operational.
Of all the different toys made for the vintage Star Wars line, there is one playset that stands apart. A playset that has become the thing of toy legend. A playset so revered that it remains a holy grail for many collectors, and fans are willing to pay big money to acquire one.
That's no moon. It's a space station.
I am of course talking about the British-designed Palitoy Death Star, a large, mostly cardboard playset that was never sold in the United States. In the late 1970s, the American market was by far the world's biggest consumer of Star Wars toys, so anything manufactured outside of the States was produced in significantly fewer numbers. That's why Yak Face is so difficult to find today, because that action figure wasn't sold in the US either. Couple this with several fragile components, and the fact that cardboard playsets have a far lower chance of surviving a child's playtime when compared to plastic playsets, and you have all the elements needed to make a toy very rare. Of course, with the Palitoy Death Star also being a really fun toy, it certainly helps elevate its collectability in the eyes of vintage Star Wars enthusiasts.
The Death Star playset, 500, 600, 700, 800, 1200, 1300. Gentleman's been in the room. Yours, sir.
The British version of this playset is vastly different to the largely injection moulded plastic design of the American-made Kenner Death Star. But why is this so? Why wasn't Kenner's toy simply released in the United Kingdom? Who came up with the idea for a cardboard Death Star? And what challenges did Palitoy face when developing the toy? We're going to answer all of these questions and more as we take a look at the truly fascinating history of the Palitoy Death Star.
Don't be too proud of this technological terror you've constructed. The ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force.
Following the phenomenal box office success of the first Star Wars film released in 1977, the Kenner company, which had secured the toy license, was racing to get product manufactured and ready for retail as quickly as possible. At the same time, Kenner wanted to expand the toy brand globally, so they reached out to their British sister company Palitoy, based in Colville, Leicestershire. Palitoy was best known for their immensely popular Action Man range, and Kenner strongly encouraged them to take on the Star Wars line.
The problem we had was it was a very small action figure. It was 3.25-inch action figure. It had to be because of the scale of the vehicles, and usually action figures are in the 9-inch to 12-inch range. Action Man was a 12-inch action figure. So the trade looked at us and said, here you are trying to launch a space-themed action figure line tied to a movie with an action figure size that's not common. We don't want to know.
Back in the 1970s, it was well accepted in the toy trade that marketing toys based on films was a risky gamble, because if the film bombed, the toys would not sell. There was also resistance from Palitoy management, because the Star Wars movie was an unknown factor, and the company wanted to protect its flagship range, Action Man. There were moves to release Star Wars toys through Dennys Fischer, which had been bought by General Mills in 1971 and was part of the Palitoy organisation. However, Dennys Fischer refused, having recently licensed the $6 Million Man, and they were also expecting to get the rights to Man from Atlantis, with both properties coming from Kenner. Having failed to convince Dennys Fischer, it was then suggested that Star Wars should go into Palitoy's wholesale division called Bradgate, but that proposal didn't eventuate either. So it took a lot of effort to persuade Palitoy to start manufacturing Star Wars toys for the UK market, but fortunately Kenner's then president Bernie Lumis was quite convincing.
And he said, if you do the job with Star Wars that you did in Action Man, we'll laugh all the way to the bank. I said, okay, start laughing.
The first 12 Star Wars action figures were not produced by Palitoy. In fact, none of them ever were. The figures were instead supplied by Kenner's manufacturers in the Far East, and these were initially packaged onto Palitoy cardbacks at the factory in Colville. Kenner's first 3 vehicles, however, were the result of Palitoy manufacturing, and these were the X-Wing, the TIE Fighter, and the Land Speeder. The first time these vehicles were seen by the Palitoy design department was when Roger Morrison and Bob Breakin visited Kenner in Cincinnati in November 1977, where they were shown the first samples coming off the injection moulding tools.
And then obviously meeting friends and colleagues in the Kenner organisation who obviously told me what was being made and what was going to be made, obviously in Europe as well. So you got an idea of what to expect when it came over to the UK, both from the point of view of manufacturing the plastic articles, but also any problems that they might have had in their production.
Kenner was unable to release the moulds for 2 of these vehicles due to great demand in the US, so Palitoy had to develop their own tooling for the X-Wing and the Landspeeder.
We had nothing to sell. We actually had resin models of some of the key product, photographs, and of course that didn't help because the trade looked at that and said, well, you'll never ship it anyway, why should I list it?
Kenner did ship over the tooling for the TIE Fighter after the US production run was complete. Palitoy tooling manager Roger Morrison then had the moulds for the X-Wing and the Landspeeder produced in the UK, based on technical information supplied by Kenner. After Bob and Roger had returned from their visit to Cincinnati, Ohio, a letter was received from Kenner's international liaison manager Norma Idler, stating that the tooling aid for the Landspeeder was on its way to England. The original American Landspeeder had an opening bonnet, but Roger decided to remove this feature from the Palitoy version. This eliminated one cavity in the mould, which would reduce the production cost of each unit, and the Palitoy Landspeeder also features glued-on silver rims, which differ from Kenner's clip-on design. The Palitoy X-Wing is also significantly different to its American counterpart, as the electronic light and sound feature was stripped out so that the marketing department was able to offer the toy at a price that would be acceptable to British retailers. Tooling aids for this toy were also sent to Colville, and Palitoy made numerous other changes to their version of the X-Wing, such as the decision to produce R2-D2's dome in VAC metal. And if you want the full rundown of this iconic toy, then I recommend checking out this Star Wars Follies video on the Retro Blasting YouTube channel. You'll find a link in the video description below.
You have to remember, this was a film that people weren't sure about. The retailers, the shops, they were reluctant to take stuff, so we had to be very careful how we designed things. So those 3 things, we had to make them as cheap as possible, really.
The 12 action figures and 3 vehicles constituted most of Palitoy's first wave of Star Wars toys released in 1978. Yet in September of that year, an advertisement was played on British television that featured an item which had not been shown in Palitoy's trade catalogue.
The year is 1978, and Palitoy bring you Star Wars. Here on Death Star, Ben Kenobi combats the awesome power of Darth Vader, while Han and Leia battle for their lives in the trash compactor. Luke evades the stormtroopers with R2, D2, and C-3PO, but can he escape in the X-Wing fighter? Only you will know. Only you can create your own Star Wars. Death Star, vehicles, figures, all sold separately. May the Force be with you.
The Death Star playset was created by the Palitoy design team, and it originally retailed for £8.25. This product would go on to be sold in other countries, with it being produced by Kenner Canada, Meccano of France, and by Toll Toys in Australia and New Zealand.
The Death Star plans are not in the main computer.
In 1978, Kenner produced their own version of the Death Star playset, but it didn't in any way resemble the spherical shape of the space station. Instead, it could be described as a segment of an orange, cut in half and standing on the flat face. Kenner's Death Star tooling could not be loaned to Palitoy for manufacturing, but it didn't really matter anyway, because this item would have been incredibly challenging to sell in the UK due to its inevitably high retail price.
The American Death Star is a great big lump of plastic, really, injection moulded. And of course, they got a big market in the States. So they could make thousands and thousands of these Death Stars and get it sold at a good price.
Fortunately though, this situation forced Palitoy to get inventive and led to them producing arguably the most iconic product in the vintage Star Wars toy range.
Palitoy had no money to develop anything on the Star Wars range.
It began in early 1978 when the marketing department presented the Palitoy design team with a mock-up of a cardboard Death Star, which had come from Palitoy's London-based advertising agency, Foot, Cone and Belding. Chief toy designer Bob Breakin remembers the appeal of this concept being the number of different rooms and levels where children could play out all the scenes from the film. The cardboard mock-up was in the shape of a dome, which also made it look more convincing as a Death Star than Kenner's pie slice approach to the toy. The cost of producing a mostly cardboard playset was also much cheaper than using injection moulded plastic, and this concept was just the ticket for the smaller Palitoy company. Yet the presented mock-up was not practical for high volume production, so Palitoy began redesigning the model to make it not just economically viable, but also easy for a child to construct. They started out with two large semicircular panels that folded in half and were then interlocked with the use of slots. This main structure sat vertically on the circular card base, with these sections forming the walls and floor of the Death Star, while also creating the central shaft.
We just came up with different ideas, different themes within it, like the tower in the middle. But then I felt when I'd seen the film, it seemed to go on forever. And so we decided to put a mirror at the bottom to give that same effect. You know, it's sort of never-ending. A little bit of silver paper there, and there you are.
To fix everything into place, Palitoy designer Brian Turner developed an identical two-piece plastic clip that snapped through a small square hole either side of the bottom corner of the card walls, and then fitted into holes in the card base. These pieces were identical to eliminate the possibility of getting an imbalance of different clips in the box. The clips held the construction together, and Brian recalls designing the clip to have some character, to look like a droid or a piece of tech against the wall, rather than just plain looking. Additional cardboard panels were added to form the floors on the second story, and a folding card corridor was added to the docking bay to link two of the upper levels. This had to be drastically redesigned from the foot cone and belding mock-up to make it simple for a child to assemble. Bob Breakin remembers that the Palitoy design team was insistent on having a moving wall in the trash compactor because of how dramatic that scene was in the movie, and this was achieved through the fitment of a separate vertical card piece with a hinge.
Into the garbage, flyboy!
So that children could recreate the scene where the film's heroes escape the stormtroopers by diving into the trash compactor, the design team created a two-part plastic trash chute that fitted into one of the upper walls and floor.
The gun turret, designed it for the figure to go in, and I actually pinched the guns themselves from the X-Wing.
A card ring was fitted at the top, firming up the walls, and in another move to keep tooling costs down, the gun turret that fitted into the card ring and its canopy, which was not featured on the original mock-up, were manufactured by the cheaper vacuum forming process. Unfortunately, because this process uses thin plastic, this makes the components far less durable than they would have been if they were produced with injection moulded plastic, and as such, very few examples have survived today. Once Palitoy was happy with the final design construction, a plain white cardboard sample was created so that an illustrator at foot cone and belding could decorate the walls and floors. This art was created under Palitoy's guidance, and for security, the final artwork was hand-delivered to Palitoy, where it was scanned to produce prints that were adhered to the white cardboard samples. These were used to create prototypes for marketing purposes, such as photography for the trade catalogue. There was no internet back in the late 1970s, so getting approval for artwork was a long-winded process. The actual physical artwork, with various overlays for elements such as the logo and the company name, which were produced by Foot Cone and Belding in London, had to be hand-delivered by courier to Lucasfilm Studios in the USA. They could sit on it for a while before issuing an approval, or sometimes they would ask for modifications. If the latter occurred, then the whole process would be repeated, including courier delivery to Colville and the same from Colville to London and back. The modified artwork was then sent back to the USA once again. It could end up taking weeks to get a single piece of artwork approved. Later, a Lucasfilm office was set up in London, essentially to speed things up, or so Palitoy marketing thought. But the guy in charge of this London office didn't believe he had any authority to approve artwork. So Palitoy had to continue sending art to America, right up to the Tri-Logo period in 1984, and this process could take up to 10 days or more. As the years have passed, there used to be some confusion as to who actually created the artwork for Palitoy's Death Star playset. During later discussions, Bob and Brian thought it was produced by legendary Action Man artist Dave Barnacle, but it was Jeff Mazie who would finally confirm that it was the originators of the concept, Foot Cone and Belding. But there is no debate over who designed the packaging. This gorgeous box is in keeping with the style of packaging being employed by Kenner at that time, and this was created by Dave Barnacle.
I got a mock-up of the actual product, so it was really just showing the product mainly, but put a kid in there playing with it, and we used my son as the model. Seemed easy to use my lad.
The artwork on the front of this box is simply gorgeous, and on the top and bottom of the box we have a cross-cell showing the 12 different action figures available at that time, while the back of the box has 4 separate artwork panels that highlight the toy's various play features.
Fear will keep the local systems in line. Fear of this battle station.
While the Death Star did not appear in Palitoy's 1978 trade catalogue, It was shown the following year alongside the Cantina and Droid Factory playsets. The toy was also sold in the UK in 1980, before being discontinued. Yet strangely, it did not appear in Palitoy's 1980 trade catalogue. It instead appeared in Chad Valley's catalogue, as did all the other Star Wars toys being promoted that year. And if you'd like to unravel the mystery as to why this happened, I recommend checking out the video we made back in 2021 that covered this very topic. You'll find a link in the video description below. Other promotional material featuring the cardboard Death Star playset include its appearance in Toltoy's trade catalogue, the 1979 Sears Canada catalogue, where it retailed for $21.99, and it began appearing on the reverse side of cardbacks in the UK, when Palitoy released their 20-back range of action figures. A unique Star Wars mini catalogue was also packed in with Palitoy Death Star playsets, and this small booklet can often be the most difficult item to find from this set, since very few have survived, and it is the only piece missing from the example that I have in my collection.
Do or do not. There is no try.
The completed Palitoy Death Star playset is a staggering achievement, both in terms of toy design and play value.
I think it is time we demonstrated the full power of this station. Set your course for Alderaan.
With pleasure.
The largest segment of the Death Star is dedicated to the docking bay, and while this cannot actually house the Millennium Falcon spaceship, that toy was not available in the United Kingdom until 1980, 2 years after the release of the playset. From here, our heroes can move through doorways in the central shaft and into another area that I call the Death Star corridors. At the far end of this segment is an opening into a control room that has printed artwork featuring no less than 5 Death Squad commanders. There are many other pieces of art on this playset that feature multiple stormtroopers, and these were added by Palitoy, so that if a child didn't have many of the action figures, it wouldn't spoil the fun.
Take over.
Returning to the Death Star corridors, there is a ladder so your figures can reach the upper level, even though no ladders appear on the space station in the movie. The only time we see characters climbing ladders in the 1977 film is on the Millennium Falcon, when they are accessing the gun turrets, and when Luke climbs aboard his X-Wing fighter, right before the movie's climax. While this feature on the Palitoy playset is far less sophisticated than the elevator included with Kenner's Death Star, I do still appreciate its inclusion, since providing a way for action figures to access the different levels is essential for a playset's layout to be logical. On the upper level is a gangway that is suspended above the docking bay.
And the corridor across, that was quite a big feature, I think, on it.
This passageway leads to Princess Leia's detention cell that includes artwork of a cushioned bed printed on the floor. Moving back around to the other side of the playset, we have the chute that our heroes can use to escape the attacking stormtroopers, and Palitoy made sure that the figures could fit through here. This chute also leads into my favourite area of the playset, the trash compactor.
Don't just stand there and try and brace it with something!
This area has some terrific artwork, yet instead of including the Dianoga Trash Monster accessory that came with the Kenner playset, Palitoy simply opted to print an illustration of the creature onto the floor. A tab on the side of the playset can be slid sideways to simulate the walls of the trash compactor closing in. This is far more effective as a play feature than the separate construct that came included with the Kenner version, which required the use of a screw-in handle. And the fact that you can view your action figures from the same angle in which the movie scene was shot is the icing on the Palitoy cake. An opening cardboard door allows the heroes to escape the trash compactor and return to the Death Star's corridors. Finally, back at the main docking bay area, we have artwork on the walls depicting the blast doors, where Ben Kenobi engages in a lightsaber duel with Darth Vader. And printed on the floor is an illustration of the deep pit, across which Luke fends off the stormtroopers before fleeing the Death Star in the Millennium Falcon. While Palitoy was able to incorporate a large number of the movie sets into this toy, there are a couple of locations that are missing. After escaping the trash compactor, the main characters get separated, with Han and Chewie drawing the fire of stormtroopers, and Luke and Leia finding themselves on a ledge above an almost bottomless fall.
Find the controls and extend the bridge.
I think I just blasted it.
The scene where Luke and Leia swing to safety is one of the most thrilling in the movie, yet Palitoy did not include this bridge area on their playset. The closest we get is this opening near the trash compactor chute that leads across the chasm in the centre and onto the gangway on the opposite side. The extending bridge was, however, included on Kenner's Death Star, as was the area where Ben Kenobi disabled the tractor beam, which is another locale omitted from the Palitoy playset. Although these areas are missing from the British Death Star, this playset has one other feature that was not included on the American version.
An analysis of the plans provided by Princess Leia has demonstrated a weakness in the battle station.
A stormtrooper figure can be seated in the gun turret by removing the canopy, yet if you remove the turret entirely, it reveals the thermal exhaust port, into which Luke fires his proton torpedoes, ultimately destroying the Death Star in the movie's thrilling climax. If you're looking to add a complete version of Palitoy's Death Star to your collection, there are 6 other accessories that you'll also need. And these are the clear action figure display stands. Each stand has a single peg that can be fitted into the hole in the figure's feet to help you display them. These are also the most commonly reproduced vintage Star Wars items, so it cracks me up when the anti-repro Star Wars crowd scream about reproductions destroying the hobby, whilst displaying all of their figures on these repro stands at the same time. While the Death Star playset remains the only Star Wars toy to include these display stands, Palitoy did issue them with the Action Force headquarters in 1982, and with their Action Force Battle Gear sets released in 1984. Speaking of the Action Force headquarters, allow me to take a moment to debunk a long-standing myth. Many people suggest that the cardboard headquarters released in 1982 is simply a redesign of the Palitoy Death Star, yet it only takes the principle of using card and is a completely new construction. This design includes the interesting feature of having a runway that pulled out flat, and when folded back it sat on top of the construction, providing a landing pad, so the AF-5 could either take off or land conventionally along the runway, or by vertical takeoff from the pad.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. I suggest we use it.
Palitoy's Death Star playset truly lives up to its legendary reputation as a highly collectible vintage Star Wars toy.
Palitoys are massively popular. I think there's a Palitoy tax referred to just because there's so fewer items made by Palitoy compared to Kenner.
I mean, I wish I'd put a few in the garage. I've always thought that.
This is another Analog Toys video that would not have been possible without the assistance of Palitoy's former chief toy designer, Mr. Bob Breakin, or without the wealth of knowledge available in his excellent book, My Palitoy Story, which is available to purchase today from the Total Toy Books website. You'll find a link in the video description below. Even though the cardboard Death Star was not produced by Kenner, in my humble opinion, it is the greatest Star Wars playset created during the vintage era. And I would like to sincerely thank Bob Breakin, Brian Turner, Jeff Mazie, Roger Morrison, Bob Simpson, and anyone else from Palitoy who had a hand in its design or manufacture. You took one of the most astonishing locations from the first Star Wars film and gave it to children in the form of a truly exciting toy. And for that, we are eternally grateful. So thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed this content, you can click the links over here to check out some of our other vintage toy retrospectives, or subscribe to the channel by clicking here, or consider supporting us on Patreon, where you'll get access to hours of exclusive content. I'm Tony from Analog Toys, and I'll see you in the next video.